The massive ship hung in space like a dark monument against the stars. The Zephyrian flagship Dominion's edge stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull gleaming with the purple-black metal that had conquered dozens of worlds. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge, his 4 arms crossed behind his back as he watched the small blue planet rotate slowly on the main display. "Pathetic," he muttered, his voice a low rumble that carried across the command deck. "This species calls itself intelligent." Captain Mordan approached from the tactical station, her movements precise despite the bulk of her armored carapace. "The preliminary scans are complete, Admiral. The beings below show no energy signatures beyond basic electrical impulses. No plasma weapons, no particle shields, no faster-than-light capability. They appear to use chemical propulsion and kinetic projectiles." Vextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. Chemical propulsion? What's next? Are they throwing rocks at each other? He turned to face the tactical display, where holographic representations of Earth's military assets floated in the air. Primitive aircraft, surface vessels that moved through water, and ground vehicles that couldn't even hover properly. "Sir, they do appear to throw rocks," reported Lieutenant Kessera from the intelligence station. "Our deep scans show they launch metal projectiles at high velocity using controlled chemical explosions. Some of their larger weapons can destroy structures, but the yield is minimal compared to even our smallest plasma charges." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Then, Vextar began to laugh, a sound like grinding metal that made the younger crew members step back nervously. "They use explosives to throw metal? And they consider this warfare?" "Admiral," Mordan said carefully, "Command did authorize first contact protocols. Perhaps we should first contact." Vextar's 4 eyes fixed on his captain. "With what? These creatures barely qualify as sapient. Look at their energy output." He gestured to the scanner readings. "Their entire planetary civilization uses less power than a single one of our destroyers." The data was indeed striking. Earth's total energy consumption registered as a barely detectable blip on Zephyrian sensors designed to measure stellar output. The humans below had no antimatter reactors, no zero-point energy extractors, no stellar collection arrays. They burned fossil fuels and split atoms with the enthusiasm of children playing with fire. "Sir, there is one curiosity," Kessera ventured. "Their biological scans show unusual diversity. Most species we've encountered show clear evolutionary specialization, but these humans display remarkable adaptability. They exist in nearly every environmental niche on their planet." Vextar waved a dismissive hand. "Scavengers adapt to survive. It means nothing. What matters is their threat potential, and they have none." He turned back to the display, studying the small cities scattered across the continents below. No orbital platforms, no deep space installations, no colonies on other worlds. They're confined to this single rock, burning their own atmosphere to stay warm. The communications officer, a thin-limbed Zephyrian named Velsun, looked up from his station. "Admiral, we're receiving transmission attempts from the surface. The humans appear to have detected our presence." "Let me hear it," Vextar commanded. Static filled the bridge before resolving into voices speaking in various human languages. The universal translator worked quickly, converting the alien sounds into meaning. "Unknown craft, this is Earth Defense Command. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. Greetings to our visitors from the stars. We come in peace and hope for peaceful contact. Warning, you have entered sovereign airspace. Reduce altitude and prepare for escort to designated landing zone." Vextar listened to the babble of voices with growing amusement. "They think they can escort us? With what? Those metal flying machines that barely reach their own stratosphere." "Sir," Mordan said, "some of their messages indicate nuclear capability. While primitive, nuclear weapons can be dangerous in sufficient quantities." "Nuclear?" Vextar's laughter returned. "They're still splitting atoms? We mastered fusion before we left our homeworld, and that was 10,000 years ago. Their most powerful weapons wouldn't scratch our hull shielding." On the display, Earth's military forces were mobilizing. Satellites adjusted their orbits for better observation angles. Fighter jets scrambled from bases across multiple continents. Naval fleets positioned themselves defensively around major population centers. It was an impressive display of coordination for such a primitive species. Remarkable, observed Science Officer Torval from the research station. Despite their limited technology, they show sophisticated organizational capabilities. Their response time to our arrival was only 17 of their minutes. Organization means nothing without power to back it up, Vextar replied. A colony of insects can organize too. It doesn't make them a threat. The tactical display updated as more human forces became active. Missile installations powered up across the planet. Submarines surfaced and took defensive positions. Ground forces moved to protect strategic locations. The humans were clearly taking the arrival of the Zephyrian fleet seriously. Admiral Velsun reported. They're attempting to establish formal communication protocols. They're transmitting mathematical sequences, prime numbers, and what appears to be basic scientific constants. How quaint. They think mathematics is universal. Vextar considered for a moment. Very well. Open a channel. Let's see what these primitives have to say for themselves. The main screen shifted to show the surface of Earth, then resolved into an image being transmitted from below. A human appeared on screen, wearing what was clearly a formal uniform of some kind. The being was smaller than a Zephyrian, with only 2 arms and no natural armor. Its skin was pale and soft-looking, without any visible defensive adaptations. This is Secretary General Maria Santos of the United Nations. On behalf of Earth and humanity, I welcome you to our system. We hope this marks the beginning of a peaceful relationship between our peoples. Vextar studied the human leader with interest. She stood straight despite her obvious nervousness, and her voice remained steady even though she had to know she was addressing a vastly superior force. Primitive, perhaps, but not entirely without courage. I am Admiral Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire, he replied, his words automatically translated. Your species has been evaluated according to standard Imperial protocols. You have 72 of your hours to prepare your world for integration into the Empire. The human's face went pale, but she didn't back down. I'm sorry, but that's not possible. Earth is a sovereign world. We're prepared to discuss trade agreements, cultural exchanges, even defensive alliances, but we will not surrender our independence. Surrender? Vextar's mandibles clicked again. Child, this is not a negotiation. This is a notification. You have no weapons that can threaten us, no shields that can protect you, no ships that can escape us. Your compliance is a foregone conclusion. We may not have your technology, Santos replied. But we have something you might not expect. We have the will to fight for our freedom. Will? The Admiral looked around his bridge at his officers, all of whom were struggling not to laugh openly. Will doesn't stop plasma bombardment. Will doesn't deflect antimatter missiles. Your courage is admirable, but pointless. The transmission ended abruptly from the human side. Vextar stared at the blank screen for a moment, then turned to his tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Zareth, what's the disposition of our fleet? 12 dreadnoughts, 47 destroyers, and 93 frigates, all at full combat readiness, came the crisp reply. The humans have approximately 2,000 military aircraft, 300 naval vessels, and an unknown number of ground-based missile systems. Total threat assessment, negligible. Excellent. Deploy standard pacification protocols. Target their military installations first, then their communication networks, then their power generation facilities. Leave their population centers intact. They'll make better workers if they're not traumatized by civilian casualties. Sir, Mordan interjected, standard protocols call for a demonstration of force before full pacification. Perhaps a single targeted strike to encourage surrender. Vextar nodded. Sensible. Select their largest military installation and remove it. That should convince them that resistance is futile. As the crew began implementing the Admiral's orders, none of them noticed the subtle changes occurring on the planet below. Human military units weren't retreating to defensive positions as expected. Instead, they were moving to attack formations. Missile silos that should have been powering down were instead coming online with full loads. Most curious of all, energy readings from certain human facilities were beginning to spike far beyond what should have been possible with their primitive technology. Target selected, Zareth reported. The Pentagon, their primary military command facility. Single plasma lance strike will vaporize the entire complex. Proceed, Vextar commanded. The dreadnought Inexorable will adjust its position slightly, bringing its main weapons array to bear on the distant planet. Energy collectors drew power from the ship's antimatter core, channeling devastating force into the primary plasma lance. The weapon charged with a sound like distant thunder. On Earth, alarms blared across every military installation. Radar operators watched in horror as energy readings spiked aboard the alien ship. In bunkers deep underground, men and women in uniform made final preparations for a war they knew they couldn't win through conventional means. Firing, Zareth announced. The plasma lance discharged, sending a beam of superheated energy across the void toward Earth. The shot would arrive in seconds, striking with the force of several nuclear weapons concentrated into a space no larger than a city block. It was a precise, overwhelming demonstration of Zephyrian technological superiority. But, as the deadly energy raced toward its target, something unexpected happened on the planet below. From a facility hidden beneath the mountains of Colorado, something else fired back. The response wasn't visible to the naked eye, wasn't picked up by standard sensors, and didn't register on any known form of detector. But, when the plasma lance was still 3 seconds from impact, it simply ceased to exist. The devastating beam of energy that should have obliterated the Pentagon dissolved into harmless light, dispersing across Earth's upper atmosphere like a gentle aurora. On the bridge of the Dominion's edge, every alarm in the ship began screaming at once. Report. Vextar snapped. Sir, the plasma lance was nullified before impact. Zareth's voice carried a note of panic. Energy readings show complete dispersal. This is impossible. Check your equipment. Run full diagnostics on the weapons array. Diagnostics complete, sir. All systems nominal. The shot fired correctly, but something on the planet's surface neutralized it. Admiral Vextar stared at the tactical display, watching the gentle light show dancing across Earth's atmosphere where his devastating attack should have left a smoking crater. For the first time in his military career, he felt something he had almost forgotten: uncertainty. Sir, Communications Officer Velsun called out, his voice tight with stress. We're receiving another transmission from the human leader. Secretary General Santos appeared on screen again, but this time her expression was different. Gone was the nervous diplomat trying to negotiate with vastly superior aliens. In her place stood someone who looked almost pitying. Admiral Vextar, she said calmly, I tried to warn you. We may not have your technology, but we have something you don't understand. We have necessity. We have desperation. And we have had 70 years to prepare for this exact scenario, ever since we first looked up at the stars and realized we weren't alone. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Zephyrian flagship in stunned silence. Below them, the small blue planet continued its lazy rotation, looking as peaceful and primitive as ever. But somewhere on that world, something had just casually swatted aside the most powerful weapon in the Zephyrian arsenal, as if it were nothing more than an annoying insect. Admiral Vextar found himself staring at Earth with new eyes, and, for the first time in decades, he began to suspect that the Zephyrian Empire might have made a serious miscalculation. 3 hours after the failed plasma strike, Admiral Vextar stood before a holographic conference table surrounded by the images of his fellow Zephyrian commanders. Fleet Admiral Crovan, Supreme Commander of the 3rd Expansion Fleet, dominated the center of the display with his massive frame and battle-scarred carapace. Explain to me, Vextar, how a species that uses chemical rockets managed to neutralize our most powerful weapons. Crovan's voice carried the authority of someone who had conquered 17 star systems. Sir, we're still analyzing the event, Vextar replied, struggling to maintain his composure. Initial theories suggest some form of energy interference, possibly a naturally occurring phenomenon we haven't encountered before. Naturally occurring? Captain Mordan stepped forward. Admiral, with respect, our deep scans showed deliberate technological intervention. The energy signature was artificial. Fleet Admiral Crovan's 4 eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting these primitives have weapons technology capable of defeating Zephyrian plasma lances? It's impossible, interjected Admiral Rixtar from the heavy cruiser Obliterator. We've seen their technological capacity. They can barely generate enough power to run their cities. Where would they get the energy to counter our weapons? On Earth, those same questions were being asked in a different context. Deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, DR, Sarah Chen stood before a massive wall of monitors displaying energy readings that should have been impossible. The Prometheus defense network had just performed exactly as designed, but even she struggled to believe what she was seeing. Director Walsh, she called to the gray-haired man studying tactical displays at the main console. The energy absorption was at 97% efficiency. We channeled their entire plasma discharge through the grid and stored it in the collection matrices. Director James Walsh nodded grimly. How much power did we harvest from their attack? Enough to run the entire North American power grid for 3 months, Dr. Chen replied. Sir, their weapons technology is incredibly advanced, but it's based on principles we understood decades ago. They're using brute force applications of known physics. While we've had to be clever, Walsh observed, necessity is indeed the mother of invention. The Prometheus project had begun in 1954, shortly after the first credible UFO sightings by military personnel. A small group of scientists and military leaders had asked a simple question. If advanced aliens existed and eventually came to Earth, how could humanity defend itself? The answer had required 70 years of secret development, hidden facilities, and breakthrough research that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Dr. Chun, what's the status of the other nodes? All 13 primary installations are online and fully charged. The Beijing node absorbed residual energy from their weapon and is actually showing a power surplus. Moscow, London, Sydney, Cape Town, they're all reporting ready status. Back on the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Vextar was reviewing scanner data with growing confusion. Science Officer Torval, explain these energy readings. The science officer's movements were agitated as he manipulated the holographic display. Sir, we're detecting massive power fluctuations across the planet, but they're occurring underground. Deep underground. The humans appear to have constructed an extensive network of facilities that our initial scans missed. How did we miss underground installations? They're using some form of masking technology. The facilities are shielded by what appears to be a combination of natural rock formations and artificial materials that scatter our sensor beams. We only detected them when they activated their defensive systems. Captain Mordan studied the new data with professional interest. Recommend we target these hidden facilities directly. If we eliminate their defensive capability, they'll have no choice but to surrender. Agreed, Vextar decided. Target the largest underground installation. Full spread, 12 plasma lances simultaneously. They can't possibly counter multiple strikes. The order went out across the fleet. 12 dreadnoughts maneuvered into firing positions, their massive weapons arrays glowing with barely contained energy. Each ship locked onto a different section of the Cheyenne Mountain complex, intending to overwhelm any defensive systems through sheer volume of fire. In the depths of the mountain, alarms blared as sensors detected the incoming threat. Director Walsh stood calmly at his command station, watching as tactical displays updated with targeting information. Sir, we have multiple locks, reported Colonel Martinez from the Defense Coordination Station. 12 ships, 12 separate targeting solutions. They're trying to saturate our defensive grid. Dr. Chun, can Prometheus handle that level of input? The physicist checked her readings quickly. Theoretically, yes. We designed the system for exactly this scenario. But, sir, we've never tested it at this level. If the energy collectors overload, they won't, Walsh said with quiet confidence. Fire Galileo. Across the planet, 13 installations that didn't appear on any public map activated simultaneously. The Galileo Defense Network had taken humanity's greatest weakness, their lack of powerful weapons, and turned it into their greatest strength. Instead of trying to match alien firepower, human engineers had created something far more elegant, a system that could absorb and redirect energy attacks with perfect efficiency. The Zephyrian plasma lances fired in perfect synchronization, sending 12 beams of devastating energy toward the Colorado installation. Each beam carried enough power to level a major city. Together, they represented firepower sufficient to crack a planet's crust. But, as the energy reached Earth's upper atmosphere, it encountered something unprecedented in Zephyrian military experience. Instead of striking their target, the plasma beams were caught by invisible collectors and channeled through superconducting networks that spanned continents. The energy that should have destroyed the mountain was instead absorbed, processed, and stored for humanity's use. Impossible. Admiral Rickstar's voice cracked across the communication channel. Our weapons are simply vanishing. On his flagship, Fleet Admiral Crovan watched the tactical display with growing rage. 12 of the most powerful weapons in the Zephyrian arsenal had been fired simultaneously, and Earth remained completely undamaged. What kind of defensive technology are we facing? Unknown, sir, Vextar admitted. But there's more. After each absorption event, we're detecting massive power buildups at various locations across the planet. They're not just defending against our attacks, they're storing the energy. The implications of that statement sent a chill through the Zephyrian command structure. A species that could absorb and store energy attacks was dangerous enough. But humans weren't just defending, they were powering up their own systems using Zephyrian weapons as fuel. On Earth, the results were immediate and dramatic. The energy absorbed from the alien attacks flowed through hidden networks to facilities that had waited decades for this moment. In Nevada, the Tesla research complex suddenly had enough power to run experiments that had previously been theoretical. In Switzerland, the CERN facility began charging particle accelerators to energy levels that had never been attempted. In Russia, the Tunguska installation activated systems that had been built but never tested. Director Walsh, Dr. Chin reported, we're receiving activation confirmations from all secondary sites. The absorbed energy has been distributed according to protocol. All defensive and offensive systems are now at maximum operational capacity. Walsh nodded slowly. Send a message to the alien fleet. I think it's time we introduced ourselves properly. The transmission reached the Zephyrian ships minutes later. This time, the human who appeared on screen wasn't a diplomat or politician. Director Walsh stood in what was clearly a military command center, surrounded by displays showing energy readings that made the aliens' own sensors look primitive. I am Director James Walsh of the Prometheus Defense Network, he began. Admiral Vextar, you and your fleet have just provided us with enough energy to defend our planet for the next several years. We thank you. Vextar found his voice. You're absorbing our weapons? Absorbing, converting, storing, and redistributing, Walsh confirmed. You see, Admiral, when your species achieved faster than light travel, you had access to virtually unlimited energy. When you developed antimatter reactors, you could power anything you wanted. You never needed to become truly efficient because you never lacked for resources. The human smile was not pleasant. Humanity has spent its entire existence struggling with energy limitations. We've learned to extract every possible joule from every possible source. We've mastered efficiency in ways you never needed to consider. So when we detected your species decades ago and realized we couldn't match your firepower, we asked a different question. What if we didn't need to? You're saying you've built your entire defense around our own weapons. Fleet Admiral Crovan demanded. Partially. But, Admiral, you've made one critical error in your assessment of humanity. Walsh's expression grew deadly serious. You assumed that because we haven't spread beyond our own planet, we lack the capability to do so. You assumed that because we use primitive rockets, we don't understand advanced physics. You assumed that because we appear weak, we actually are weak. The transmission paused as warning alarms began blaring on Zephyrian ships throughout the fleet. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Zareth called out in panic. We're detecting massive energy buildups on the planet's surface. Power levels are spiking beyond our measurement capabilities. On Earth, the network of hidden installations that had absorbed the aliens' attacks was now channeling that energy into systems that had waited 7 decades to be tested. The Prometheus project had always been about more than defense. It had been about ensuring that if humanity ever faced a threat from space, they would be ready to fight back. Dr. Chun, Walsh said calmly, are the launchers charged? All sites report full power, sir. We have enough energy to fire the entire arsenal. Walsh turned back to the communication screen. Admiral Vextar, you wanted a demonstration of force. Allow us to provide one. Across Earth, hidden doors opened in mountainsides and underground facilities. Launch tubes that had been concealed for decades rose from beneath carefully camouflaged surfaces. And, from 13 installations around the globe, humanity fired back. The weapons that emerged from Earth weren't the chemical rockets or kinetic projectiles the Zephyrians had detected in their scans. These were devices that human scientists had dreamed of building for decades, but had never possessed the energy to power. Particle beam weapons that could cut through any known material. Gravitational disruptors that could tear apart the molecular bonds of enemy vessels. Quantum field generators that could phase matter in and out of normal space-time. And powering them all was the energy that the Zephyrian Empire had so graciously provided. The first particle beam reached the destroyer Relentless Conquest in 1.3 seconds, cutting through its hull shielding as if it weren't there. The ship's antimatter core, suddenly exposed to uncontrolled particle bombardment, began a catastrophic chain reaction that consumed the vessel in seconds. The second beam caught the cruiser Inevitable Victory as it tried to maneuver away from the planet. The gravitational disruptor accompanying the beam tore the ship's superstructure apart at the molecular level, reducing 900 meters of advanced alien technology to its component atoms. Across the Zephyrian fleet, captains who had never known defeat watched their instruments register damage that should have been impossible. Shields that could stop stellar radiation failed against human particle beams. Armor that had deflected asteroid impacts crumpled under gravitational manipulation. Ships that had conquered star systems found themselves outgunned by a species that supposedly threw rocks. Evasive maneuvers. Fleet Admiral Crovan roared. All ships, emergency jump to hyperspace. But the quantum field generators had already activated, creating spatial distortions that made faster-than-light travel impossible within the solar system. The Zephyrian fleet, for the first time in its history, was trapped. As Admiral Vextar watched 3 more of his destroyers disappear under the human bombardment, he began to understand the true magnitude of their error. Humanity hadn't been sitting quietly on their single planet because they lacked the technology to expand. They had been waiting, preparing, and building weapons that could challenge any threat the galaxy might send their way. The humans weren't powerless. They were patient. The battle raged for 6 hours. When the last human weapon fell silent, 17 Zephyrian vessels drifted dead in space around Earth's moon. The once mighty Third Expansion Fleet had been reduced to barely half its original strength, and those ships still functional were limping away from the small blue planet with hull breaches, failed shields, and crews that no longer believed in their own invincibility. Admiral Vextar stood on the emergency bridge of his flagship, the main command center having been gutted by a human particle beam that had somehow penetrated their finest military shielding. Around him, surviving officers worked at damaged stations, trying to make sense of what had just happened to them. "Damage report," he commanded, his voice hoarse from breathing recycled air thick with smoke from burned electronics. 23 ships lost, sir," Captain Mordan reported. She had sustained injuries when a console exploded near her station, but remained at her post. 14 more with critical damage. "We've lost 60% of our offensive capability." "And the humans?" "No significant damage detected to their installations. Sir, our weapons couldn't penetrate their defensive grid. Every shot we fired was absorbed and used to power their counterattacks." Vextar closed his 4 eyes and tried to process the magnitude of their defeat. The Third Expansion Fleet had conquered worlds protected by antimatter missiles, plasma shields, and gravity weapons. They had broken civilizations that spanned multiple star systems. Yet they had been outfought by a species that still used chemical combustion to reach orbit. "Sir," Communications Officer Velson called out weakly, "we're receiving another transmission from the planet." The main screen flickered to life, revealing Director Walsh standing in what appeared to be an observation deck. Through the windows behind him, stars were visible, but the view was wrong somehow. The perspective showed Earth from orbit, but no human space station had been detected by Zephyrian sensors. "Admiral Vextar," Walsh began, "I hope this demonstration has clarified humanity's position. We are not defenseless, we are not primitive, and we are certainly not willing to surrender our independence to the Zephyrian Empire." "Where are you transmitting from?" Vextar demanded. "Our scans show no orbital installations around your planet." Walsh smiled. "Admiral, You've spent the last several hours learning that your scans are not as accurate as you believed. We've had a space-based presence for longer than your species has known about Earth. The camera pulled back, revealing that Walsh was indeed on a space station, but one unlike anything in Zephyrian experience. The structure was vast, clearly artificial, but its construction was so different from standard designs that it had been invisible to alien sensors. Where Zephyrian ships were built for power and intimidation, the human installation was designed for concealment and efficiency. This is orbital platform Prometheus, Walsh continued. One of 7 installations that have been monitoring your approach for the past 3 months. We've been studying your technology, learning your weaknesses, and preparing countermeasures. On the screen, the camera shifted to show other human vessels moving into view. They weren't the sleek warships that dominated galactic military thinking. Instead, they were angular, practical craft that looked more like industrial equipment than weapons of war. But, after what the fleet had just experienced, no Zephyrian was inclined to underestimate their capabilities. These ships represent 70 years of human military development guided by a single principle. We knew we would eventually face a technologically superior enemy, so we designed our forces to defeat superior technology through superior tactics and strategy. Admiral Vextar found himself studying the human vessels with professional interest despite his situation. Your ships, they're designed around energy absorption technology. Among other things, Walsh confirmed. Every human military vessel incorporates lessons learned from decades of preparing for this exact scenario. We couldn't match your firepower, so we built ships that don't need to. We couldn't match your shields, so we designed weapons that ignore them. We couldn't match your speed, so we created battlefield conditions that make speed irrelevant. The quantum field generators, Mordan realized. You're not just preventing us from jumping to hyperspace. You're controlling the entire engagement environment. Correct. Within the solar system, our technology now determines the rules of engagement. Your ships are faster than ours in open space, but we're not fighting in open space. We're fighting in a carefully prepared battlefield where our advantages matter more than yours. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just prepared defenses against alien invasion. They had transformed their entire solar system into a tactical environment designed to neutralize technological superiority. Every asteroid, every satellite, every seemingly harmless piece of space debris could potentially be part of their defense network. What do you want from us? Vextar asked finally. Nothing, Walsh replied simply. We want you to leave. We want you to report back to your empire that Earth is defended and that further attacks will result in the complete destruction of any force sent against us. And we want the Zephyrian Empire to understand that humanity is prepared to extend the same protection to any world that requests our assistance. You're threatening the Empire? I'm making the Empire an offer. Respect our independence, and we'll respect yours. Attempt to conquer or subjugate us, and we'll demonstrate that human defensive technology can become offensive very quickly. To emphasize the point, long-range sensors detected multiple human vessels moving beyond the orbit of Pluto. They were heading toward the hyperspace jump point the Zephyrian fleet had used to enter the system, effectively blocking the most direct route to Zephyrian space. Sir, Science Officer Torval reported from his damaged station. Those ships are deploying some kind of field generators. If I'm reading this correctly, they're creating a barrier that will prevent hyperspace travel in this direction. Walsh nodded on the screen. The quantum interdiction field will remain in place for 1 standard galactic year. Any Zephyrian vessel attempting to approach Earth during that time will find itself trapped in normal space, well within range of our defensive installations. You're cutting off an entire sector of space. Fleet Admiral Crovan's voice carried across the communication channel from his own damaged flagship. We're ensuring that the Zephyrian Empire has time to consider the new strategic situation, Walsh corrected. A year should be sufficient for your leaders to understand that Earth is no longer a target for conquest. The transmission continued for another 20 minutes, during which Director Walsh outlined the terms of humanity's non-aggression proposal. The Zephyrian Empire could maintain trade routes through human space, but only with advance permission and under escort. Any military vessels entering the solar system would be considered hostile and destroyed without warning. Most importantly, any attempt to attack or subjugate other worlds in the region would result in direct human military intervention. When the communication ended, Admiral Vextar found himself alone with his thoughts for the first time since the battle began. The bridge crew was busy with repairs and damage assessment, leaving him to contemplate the magnitude of what had just occurred. The Zephyrian Empire had built its power on technological superiority. For 10,000 years, they had conquered worlds by arriving with weapons and ships so advanced that resistance was futile. Species that couldn't match their firepower were absorbed into the Empire, their resources used to build even more powerful fleets. But humanity had found a different path. Instead of trying to match Zephyrian technology, they had developed counters to it. Instead of building bigger weapons, they had built smarter ones. Instead of relying on superior firepower, they had created superior tactics. Admiral, Captain Mordan approached cautiously. What are your orders? Vextar considered his options. The fleet was badly damaged, trapped in the solar system, and facing an enemy that had already proven capable of destroying them. His ships were low on ammunition, many were operating on backup power, and crew morale had collapsed after their first major defeat in centuries. Signal the fleet, he decided. All ships are to maintain position at current coordinates. No aggressive actions, no scanning attempts, no communication with the surface except on designated frequencies. Sir, shouldn't we attempt to break through their blockade? Fight our way out of the system. With what? Vextar gestured toward the tactical display showing the pitiful remnants of his once mighty fleet. They've demonstrated that our weapons are useless against their defenses, while their weapons can destroy our ships with ease. Any attempt to fight our way out would result in the total annihilation of the fleet. Then, we're prisoners? We're survivors. And our job now is to make sure the Empire learns from our mistakes. As the surviving Zephyrian vessels settled into defensive formations around the outer planets, Earth continued its peaceful rotation in space. But appearances were deceiving. The planet that had seemed so primitive and defenseless now revealed itself as the center of a military network that spanned the solar system. Hidden sensors tracked every movement of the alien fleet. Concealed weapons platforms maintained targeting locks on every Zephyrian vessel. And somewhere in the depths of space, human ships that didn't appear on any scanner prepared to defend not just their homeworld, but any world that asked for their protection. The age of Zephyrian expansion was over. Humanity had entered the galactic stage, and they had announced their presence by defeating the most powerful military force in known space. But the war was far from finished. News of the Third Fleet's defeat would soon reach the Zephyrian homeworld, and the Empire's response would determine whether this marked the beginning of peace or the start of a much larger conflict. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same. On Earth, in the command centers hidden beneath mountains and ocean floors, human military leaders began preparing for the next phase. They had proven they could defend their world. Now they had to prove they could defend the principles they had fought for: freedom, independence, and the right of every species to determine its own destiny. The message they had sent with their victory was simple but profound. Humanity would not be conquered, would not be enslaved, and would not stand by while others suffered the same fate. They had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength, and, in doing so, they had changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Admiral Vextar, staring out at the stars from his damaged bridge, began to suspect that the Zephyrian Empire was about to face a reckoning that had been 70 years in the making. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, the Zephyrian homeworld of Krextal buzzed with unprecedented activity. The massive city spires that housed the Empire's ruling council gleamed under the light of twin suns. But the usual atmosphere of confident superiority had been replaced by something darker: uncertainty. Emperor Thaxmore stood in the center of the grand strategic chamber, his ancient form draped in the ceremonial armor that had been worn by Zephyrian rulers for 5,000 years. Around him, holographic displays showed star maps marked with troubling new information. Red zones indicated systems where human vessels had been detected. Yellow zones marked worlds that had formally requested human protection. Green zones, representing secure Zephyrian territory, seemed to shrink with each daily update. Explain to me. The Emperor's voice rumbled through the chamber. how a single world has managed to compromise the security of 17-star systems in less than 6 standard months. Supreme Admiral Kexvar, newest commander of the Zephyrian military forces, manipulated the holographic display with practiced efficiency. Your Excellency, the humans have not remained passive since their victory over the Third Fleet. Intelligence reports indicate they have deployed vessels throughout this entire sector, offering what they call defensive partnerships to any world that requests assistance. And how many worlds have accepted these partnerships? 43, Your Excellency, including 12 that were previously tribute worlds of the Empire. The silence that followed this announcement was profound. Tribute worlds were the foundation of Zephyrian power, providing resources and labor that funded the Empire's expansion. The loss of even one was significant. The loss of 12 was catastrophic. What are the humans offering that we cannot? Freedom from conquest, Your Excellency. They guarantee that any world under their protection will remain independent, self-governing, and free from military occupation. They ask for no tribute, demand no resources, and impose no political system. Emperor Thaxmore's forearms crossed in a gesture of deep contemplation. And in exchange? Nothing, Your Excellency. The humans appear to be offering protection without expecting payment or political concessions. Impossible. No species offers military protection without expecting something in return. Our intelligence suggests otherwise, Your Excellency. Human philosophy appears to center on something they call self-determination. They believe all sapient species have the inherent right to govern themselves without outside interference. The Emperor studied the star maps with growing unease. The Zephyrian Empire had been built on a simple principle. The strong conquered the weak, and the weak served the strong. It was natural law, the way the universe functioned. The idea that a species would offer protection without demanding subjugation challenged the fundamental assumptions that had guided Zephyrian expansion for millennia. What is our current military assessment of human capabilities? Supreme Admiral Kexvar called up another series of displays. Based on the Third Fleet's encounter, human defensive technology is approximately 800 years ahead of our current capabilities. Their energy absorption systems make conventional weapons useless, and their offensive capabilities can penetrate our most advanced shielding. But they remain confined to a single star system? No, Your Excellency. That assessment has proven incorrect. Long-range reconnaissance has detected human vessels operating as far as the Andorian cluster, nearly 200 light-years from Earth. They appear to have developed faster-than-light capabilities far superior to our own. The implications were staggering. A species that had seemed confined to one world due to primitive technology had actually been building interstellar capabilities in secret. More disturbing still, they were using those capabilities not for conquest, but for what they called liberation. Show me the Vorthan incident, the Emperor commanded. The holographic display shifted to show the purple and gold world of Vorth Prime, one of the Empire's most productive tribute worlds. The planet's population of crystalline beings had provided exotic minerals for Zephyrian technology for over 3 centuries. 2 months ago, they had formally requested human protection. The Vorthans sent a message to our garrison commander, Admiral Kexvar explained, informing him that they were terminating their tribute agreement with the Empire. When Commander Zaltaith refused to withdraw Zephyrian forces, the Vorthans transmitted coordinates to a human fleet. The display showed what happened next. 3 human vessels, smaller than Zephyrian destroyers but clearly advanced beyond anything in the Imperial database, had emerged from hyperspace near the planet. They had transmitted a simple message to the Zephyrian garrison: withdraw peacefully or be removed by force. Commander Zaltaith chose to fight? Yes, Your Excellency. His force consisted of 2 dreadnoughts and 6 destroyers against 3 human ships. The engagement lasted 14 minutes. The tactical recording played out in miniature on the holographic display. The human vessels moved with impossible grace, their hulls rippling with energy fields that absorbed every shot fired at them. In response, they deployed weapons that seemed to bend reality itself. Zephyrian ships found their hulls phasing in and out of normal space-time, their antimatter reactors shutting down due to quantum interference, their crews rendered unconscious by neural disruptor fields. When the battle ended, 8 Zephyrian warships drifted powerless in space, while human boarding parties secured them with no casualties on either side. The Zephyrian crews were transferred to escape pods and sent to the nearest Imperial outpost with a simple message. Vorth Prime was now under human protection. They didn't destroy our ships, the Emperor observed. No, Your Excellency. Human military doctrine appears to emphasize capture over destruction whenever possible. Our analysis suggests they view unnecessary killing as morally objectionable. And the Vorthans? They have established a constitutional democracy under human oversight. Their mineral production has actually increased since independence, and they are now trading freely with multiple species throughout the sector. Emperor Thaxmore turned away from the displays, his ancient mind struggling with concepts that challenged everything he thought he knew about galactic politics. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered through strength and maintained control through fear. The humans seemed to be achieving the same level of influence through what they called friendship and mutual benefit. What do our allies say about this situation? The Korth Republic has formally recognized human territorial claims and established trade relations. The Nexian Confederacy has requested human mediation in their border dispute with the Talmar Union. Even the Breltar, who have been our military partners for 6 centuries, have begun secret negotiations with human representatives. Our allies are abandoning us. They are hedging their bets, Your Excellency. Human diplomatic outreach has been extensive and effective. They offer trade agreements, technological exchange, and mutual defense pacts without demanding political submission. The Emperor's anger was beginning to show, his carapace darkening to the deep purple that indicated extreme emotional stress. And what do the humans want from us? Admiral Kexvar hesitated before answering. Nothing, Your Excellency. They have made no demands regarding the Empire itself. Their only requirement is that we cease expansion activities and respect the independence of worlds that choose human protection. They want us to abandon the conquest that has made us the dominant power in this region. Yes, Your Excellency. And if we refuse? Intelligence suggests they are prepared for that possibility. Human industrial capacity appears to be enormous, and their ship production has increased dramatically since the Battle of Earth. Our estimates indicate they could field a fleet 10 times the size of our entire military within 2 standard years. The Emperor stared at the star map, watching the green zones that represented secure Zephyrian territory continue to shrink as more worlds declared independence under human protection. The empire that had taken 10,000 years to build was unraveling in less than a year, not through military conquest, but through something far more dangerous, the offer of freedom. Your Excellency, Admiral Kexvar ventured carefully. There is one more piece of intelligence that may be relevant. Speak. Our deep space reconnaissance has detected massive construction activity in the outer reaches of human space. Initial analysis suggests they are building something far larger than any ship in our database. The energy signatures are unprecedented. Another weapon? Unknown, Your Excellency. But the scale of the construction suggests a project of enormous significance. Emperor Thaxmore closed his 4 eyes and made a decision that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Schedule a diplomatic meeting with human representatives. It appears we need to negotiate. Meanwhile, in the depths of space beyond the orbit of Neptune, the largest construction project in human history neared completion. The vessel taking shape in the hidden shipyards was not a warship, despite its size. Instead, it was something completely unprecedented, a mobile diplomatic platform designed to carry human values and protection to any corner of the galaxy that requested them. Director Walsh stood in the observation lounge of the nearly completed ship, watching construction crews putting the finishing touches on a vessel that would carry the message of human determination to species across the galaxy. The ship was massive, nearly 8 kilometers long, but its weapons were entirely defensive. Its real power lay in its medical facilities, its diplomatic quarters, its educational centers, and its capacity to provide aid to any world that needed it. Director, Admiral Sarah Mitchell approached from the tactical station. We're receiving confirmation that the Zephyrian Empire has requested formal negotiations. Walsh nodded without surprise. Where do they want to meet? They've proposed a neutral system on the border between human and Zephyrian space. The world is called Haven 7, a former mining colony that was abandoned decades ago. Appropriate. Schedule a diplomatic mission for next month. And Admiral? Yes, sir. Make sure they understand that we're coming to discuss peace, not to accept surrender. Humanity's goal isn't the conquest of the Zephyrian Empire. It's the liberation of every world that wants to be free. As the two humans watched, the massive ship's hull plating sealed the last gaps in its construction. The vessel would be humanity's ambassador to the galaxy, carrying a message that would echo across the stars. Freedom was not just a human value. It was a universal right that humanity was prepared to defend anywhere it was threatened. The Zephyrian Empire was about to learn that some powers could not be conquered because they were built on ideas rather than weapons. And ideas, once unleashed, were impossible to stop. The diplomatic station hung in the void between stars like a monument to necessity. Haven 7 had been chosen for the negotiations precisely because it belonged to no one, claimed by neither the Zephyrian Empire nor humanity's expanding sphere of protection. The abandoned mining platform had been hastily converted into a neutral meeting ground where two incompatible philosophies would attempt to find common ground. Emperor Thaxmore arrived in a fleet of 7 ships, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that everyone present knew were useless against human technology. The display of force was traditional, expected, and ultimately meaningless. What mattered was the conversation that would take place in the sterile conference rooms of the converted station. Humanity's delegation arrived in a single vessel that defied every convention of diplomatic protocol. The ship was enormous, larger than many space stations, but its hull showed no weapons arrays, no defensive barriers, no signs of military preparation. Instead, the vessel radiated a sense of purpose that was somehow more intimidating than any weapon display. Director Walsh led the human delegation into the main conference chamber, followed by Admiral Mitchell and a small team of advisors. Their uniforms were simple, practical, and completely lacking in the ceremonial decoration that typically accompanied diplomatic meetings between galactic powers. They looked like people who had work to do rather than status to display. Emperor Thaxmore dominated the opposite side of the table, his ancient form still impressive despite the defeats his empire had suffered. Admiral Kexvar and a dozen other Zephyrian officials flanked him, their carapaces gleaming under the harsh station lighting. The contrast between the two delegations was stark. The humans appeared relaxed and confident, while the Zephyrians carried themselves with the tension of those who knew they were negotiating from a position of weakness. Director Walsh, the Emperor began, his voice carrying the authority of 10,000 years of rule. You have disrupted the natural order of this region. 16-star systems now refuse imperial authority, claiming human protection. Tribute worlds that have served the Empire for centuries have declared independence. Our sphere of influence shrinks daily. Walsh nodded calmly. Your Excellency, I understand your concerns. Change is never comfortable, especially when it challenges long-established systems. But I would respectfully suggest that what we've disrupted isn't natural order, but artificial subjugation. The strong rule the weak. This is the way of nature itself. With respect, Your Excellency, that's the way of predators. Sapient species have the capacity to choose cooperation over domination, partnership over conquest. Humanity believes that strength should be used to protect freedom, not to eliminate it. Admiral Kexvar leaned forward. You speak of protection, but your fleets have destroyed Imperial vessels, captured our crews, and denied us access to resources that have supported our civilization for millennia. We have defended worlds that requested our assistance against forces that sought to maintain their subjugation, Admiral Mitchell replied. Every engagement we've been involved in was initiated by Imperial forces attempting to maintain control over populations that had formally requested independence. Independence you encouraged them to seek. We informed them that independence was possible. The choice to pursue it was entirely their own. Emperor Thaxmore studied the humans across the table with growing frustration. Every Zephyrian argument was met with calm logic. Every accusation answered with statements that somehow made Imperial actions seem unreasonable. It was a level of diplomatic skill that the Empire rarely encountered. What do you want from us? He asked finally. Recognition of the right of self-determination for all sapient species. Walsh replied without hesitation. An end to forced tribute systems, military occupation of unwilling worlds, and expansion through conquest. In exchange, humanity offers trade relationships, technological exchange, and mutual defense against genuine external threats. You ask us to abandon the principles that built our empire. I ask you to adopt principles that could build something better. The Emperor's forearms spread in a gesture of disbelief. Better? The Zephyrian Empire has brought order to dozens of systems, eliminated conflicts between primitive species, established trade networks that span this entire region. We have created stability where there was chaos. You've created the stability of the grave, Walsh replied quietly. Order imposed through force isn't order, Your Excellency. It's oppression with good public relations. And your alternative? Freedom. Messy, complicated, sometimes inefficient freedom. The right of every world to make its own mistakes, choose its own leaders, and determine its own destiny. Even if they choose poorly? Especially then. The right to make mistakes is fundamental to sapience. Without it, you have slavery dressed up as protection. The debate continued for hours, touching on every aspect of galactic politics, philosophy, and practical governance. The Zephyrian delegation argued from thousands of years of successful expansion, pointing to the prosperity and stability their rule had brought to conquered worlds. The human delegation countered with testimonies from newly independent worlds, examples of flourishing trade between free partners, and the simple moral argument that no species had the right to rule another without consent. Finally, Emperor Thaxmore raised the question that had haunted him since the negotiations began. What happens if we refuse your terms? If we continue our expansion and maintain our tribute systems? Walsh was quiet for a long moment before answering. Then, we will continue to offer protection to any world that requests it. We will defend their independence, support their development, and help them build the capacity to defend themselves. Eventually, Your Excellency, the Zephyrian Empire will find itself surrounded by free worlds backed by human technology and principles. You would go to war with the Empire? We would defend freedom. If the Empire chooses to interpret that as war, the consequences will be unfortunate for everyone involved. You realize that the Empire spans 47 star systems? Our military includes thousands of vessels, millions of soldiers, resources that dwarf anything humanity could muster. Walsh smiled sadly. Your Excellency, 6 months ago you believed that humanity was a primitive species trapped on a single world. We've had 70 years to prepare for this conversation, and we've spent that time very productively. Our industrial capacity, our technological development, our strategic planning, all of it has been directed toward one goal, ensuring that freedom has the strength to defend itself against tyranny. Admiral Mitchell touched a control on her tablet, and the conference room's displays came alive with images that made every Zephyrian present freeze in shock. Star charts showing human vessels operating in systems they didn't know humans had ever visited. Industrial installations that dwarfed anything in the Imperial database. Ship construction facilities that could produce entire fleets in the time it took the Empire to build a single destroyer. This is impossible, Admiral Kexvar whispered. Our intelligence shows no evidence of this level of human development. Your intelligence shows what we wanted it to show, Admiral Mitchell replied. We've learned that the best defense against a technologically superior enemy is to make sure they never realize the scope of your actual capabilities until it's too late to matter. The final display showed a strategic analysis that took the Emperor's breath away. Human forces were positioned throughout the region, not as an occupying army but as a protective network. Every world that had requested human assistance was defended by technology that made Imperial weapons obsolete. Trade routes that had once fed the Empire's expansion now connected free worlds in a web of mutual prosperity. Most disturbing of all, the analysis showed that the Zephyrian Empire was no longer the dominant power in the region. Humanity had achieved strategic superiority not through conquest, but by offering something the Empire never could, genuine partnership. How long? The Emperor asked quietly. How long for what, Your Excellency? How long have you been planning this? How long have you been maneuvering us into this position? Walsh considered his answer carefully. Since 1954, by your calendar. When humanity first confirmed that we weren't alone in the universe, a small group of leaders asked a simple question. What if the aliens we encounter aren't friendly? Everything that's happened since then, our defensive preparations, our technological development, our strategic positioning, it's all been guided by that question. 70 years. 70 years of assuming that we would eventually face a threat we couldn't match through conventional means. So we became unconventional. We built better technology, better strategies, better alliances. We prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Emperor Thaxmore stared at the displays showing the true scope of human capabilities, finally, understanding the magnitude of his empire's miscalculation. They had dismissed humanity as primitive and weak, never realizing that what they interpreted as weakness was actually restraint, and what they saw as primitivism was actually discretion. What happens now, he asked. That depends on you, Your Excellency. Humanity offers partnership, trade, and mutual respect. We can work together to build a region where all species prosper, where conflicts are resolved through negotiation rather than force, where diversity is celebrated rather than suppressed. And if we refuse, then you refuse. Humanity won't force you to be free, Your Excellency. That would be rather defeating the point. But we also won't allow you to prevent others from choosing freedom. The negotiations continued for 3 more days, hammering out details, establishing protocols, and creating frameworks for a relationship between 2 fundamentally different approaches to galactic civilization. In the end, the Zephyrian Empire didn't surrender, it evolved. The final agreement established the Galactic Cooperation Accords, a framework that guaranteed the right of self-determination for all sapient species while providing mechanisms for voluntary cooperation, mutual defense, and peaceful resolution of conflicts. The Zephyrian Empire would gradually transition from a system of forced tribute to voluntary trade relationships. Worlds that chose to remain associated with the Empire would do so as partners rather than subjects. Those that preferred independence would receive it without penalty. Most importantly, both humanity and the Empire committed to supporting the freedom of choice for any world that requested it. As the delegations prepared to return to their respective territories, Emperor Thaxmore approached Director Walsh privately. You could have destroyed us, the ancient ruler said quietly. Your technology, your strategic position, your alliances, you could have dismantled the Empire completely. Why didn't you? Walsh smiled. Because that would have made us everything we fought against, Your Excellency. Freedom can't be imposed any more than slavery can be justified. The goal was never to destroy the Zephyrian Empire. It was to give everyone the choice to be free. Even us. Especially you. The right to choose applies to everyone, including former conquerors. The Empire can choose to evolve into something better, or it can choose to maintain the old ways in whatever territory remains willing to accept them. That's freedom too. As the human delegation departed Haven 7 aboard their massive diplomatic vessel, they left behind more than just a treaty. They had planted an idea that would grow throughout the galaxy. The radical notion that might should serve right, that strength should protect rather than dominate, and that the greatest power a species could wield was the choice to use that power responsibly. The Zephyrian Empire, faced with the reality that conquest was no longer possible, began the slow process of transformation. Some worlds chose to remain within the imperial structure as it evolved into a voluntary confederation. Others chose independence and flourished under human protection. A few chose different paths entirely, creating new forms of government and society. Throughout the galaxy, the message spread. Humanity had proven that the seemingly powerless could become powerful, that the apparently weak could become strong, and that freedom, once unleashed, could not be stopped by any force in the universe. The age of involuntary empire was ending. The age of chosen cooperation had begun. And, at the center of it all, the small blue world that had once seemed so vulnerable continued its peaceful rotation around an ordinary star, its people proud to have proven that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the courage to protect.